big time. All right, guys, welcome into BamaNews. Don't mind Patrick and I. We're talking about Power Rangers, just so everyone knew.
I don't think you watch Power Rangers from what you just said.
I don't. I simply said that you were nerding out. He was. But Patrick is the Green Power Ranger today. Guys, welcome to BamaNews, Week 12 of the college football season. Alabama hosts Arkansas this week, Saturday, 2:30 kickoff at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Alabama's 11th game of the season, second to last of the regular season. We're going to break all the things down, go back a little bit and talk about some injuries, look ahead to the Iron Bowl, and look ahead to what the college football playoff rankings could look like this evening. And to do all that, we're going to welcome in Mike Rodak to the show with AL.com. Rodak, thanks for joining us. This one here, 2:30 kickoff, Saturday at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Your overall thoughts just looking at this game?
Well, if they win it, then they win the SEC West, which I wasn't really expecting, 5 days ago, let's say, going into that weekend of games. Obviously, Alabama is going to beat New Mexico State. I wasn't expecting that both A&M and Auburn were going to lose. I'm sure Auburn fans weren't expecting Auburn was going to lose in that game either. But to come out of that with those two losses, really helped Alabama not totally wrap up the SEC West, but all they need is one more win. And that will, I'd say, more than likely come against Arkansas. They're 22 and a half point favorites. And Senior Day, it's a home game. I don't see it being the sort of threat that, even LSU was at home, but let's say A&M on the road. Like, I don't know if this is an upset waiting to happen. Arkansas definitely better this year. And, I think Saban's really talked about them being one of the the most improved team in the country from last year, but still overall, they've struggled the last 6 weeks compared to, let's say, the first 4 weeks of the season. In Alabama, they look good. I think they did what they needed to do against New Mexico State. And I just really wouldn't expect a whole lot of drama. So then that wraps up the SEC West for Alabama. But this is still college football. It's not like the NFL wwhere you win a division and it's like, all right, you can just kind of sleepwalk through the rest of the season because you're making the playoffs. This is, you still got to win. And, the Iron Bowl is still going to mean something, I think, on that end.
I'll say, the only problem with the Arkansas game isn't that what we said about Texas A&M and Tennessee and LSU? It was like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about Mercer. And every single week they kind of struggled a little bit. And I think we're going to talk about the injuries, but if anything, this is a game for Alabama to reinvent its offense for what it needs to take down Georgia in about 3 weeks, because they are lacking. And clearly we see that every single week. And the running back depth is certainly an issue. So look for the Tide to I would think that Bill O'Brien and Saban have to cook something up this week in preparation for obviously the Iron Bowl, but mostly the SEC championship game.
Sure. So 2:30 kickoff. Welcome to BamaNews. If you're just tuning in, this is show number 11, week 12 of the college football season. I know a lot of fans pumped up about Arkansas at Bryant-Denny Stadium this week. One big concern is the injury factor. Mike and Patrick, you both have brought that up. Roydell Williams, probably the biggest news out of the New Mexico State game. He is out indefinitely with what we believe is a significant knee injury. Mike, what's the latest that you know about that and other injuries the Tide are facing right now?
Yeah, Saban said yesterday it's going to require surgery, which means he's out for the year. That's pretty clear at this point. So that leaves them with, he's the second running back that they've lost for a knee injury out for the year. And effectively, there's a third that's out for the year too. That's Kamar Wheaton, the 5-star freshman who I think at this point would have definitely been playing had he been healthy. He had a meniscus injury going back to August, and I think it was the first week of October that Saban was saying he was kind of week to week, and they'd see how it went with him. I asked during the bye week about Wheaton. Saban said he wasn't really close. So I'd imagine, maybe there's a chance he comes back for like a bowl game, playoff game, but that's 3 running backs that they're basically down right now. And that leaves them with Brian Robinson, who's really dependable, durable, taking a lot of carries at this point. I think you kind of have to squeeze what's left out of him, these final 4 or 5 games of the year. And this is the final 4 or 5 games of his college career. I think he's going to be giving it all he has. But you can't afford him getting hurt. You can't afford him getting worn down to the point where he's not effective behind an offensive line that we've all talked about has been an issue. And that leaves them with Trey Sanders is the other guy, and he's still trying to work his way back from what he was before multiple injuries, really, his foot injury and then the car accident. And, I think Saban said it's kind of an opportunity for him to step up. And, there is some stepping up that I think he has to do into that role. So it's tight. And this is an offense I think has been at its best when they're balanced and they're running the ball. And it's not the most explosive offense or not as explosive as it's been. And they kind of need that presence. It's just how much longer can they hold on with players that they have.
See, and that's why I bring up like reassessing how the offense runs. Because if you are now running linebackers like the Moy Kennedy or freshman wide receivers at running back, you just might need, I know it's hard to do at the end of the season, but somewhat of an overhaul, because now you have two pretty good tight ends. You have most of your downfield threats are going to two guys in Mechie and Jameson Williams. Apparently, Slade Bolden is nowhere to be seen, and maybe you could fill us in on that as well. But I don't know if they're going to start doing jet sweeps, with
that's all I was going to say. This, I mean, they're going to have to do it.
Yeah, because I think like even in the last game, like we were just talking about how Bryce Young likes to scramble, right? And that's how he was getting sacked so much versus LSU. Well, maybe you need to open that up with a spread offense a little bit more because you can't bring Brian Robinson down the hole every time against Georgia. I think both of you know football well enough to know that is not going to work. They're going to shut you down. You're going to be one-dimensional, and then you only have these two outside threats. So something needs to happen. I hope they show it on Saturday.
How concerned, guys, do you feel like we should be when it comes to this offensive line? Not only in some issues when it pertains to the run game, but certainly in pass pro and situations that we've seen in recent games.
Concerned. I mean, I think Patrick said it, like that Georgia game is going to be all or nothing for Alabama. And we can get into it later in terms of the playoff scenarios, but you win that game, you're in the playoff. You lose that game, you're almost certainly out of the playoff. So everything needs to be, and I understand there's two games before then, the Iron Bowl is less daunting now because of Bo Nix being out, but it's still the Iron Bowl in Auburn. But everything's about the Georgia game. And if you can't run the ball against Georgia, then you're going to need to throw the ball. You need to throw the ball. You need pass protection. So it all kind of works together. And they need that for their playmakers and Bryce Young and Jameson Williams and these guys who are probably the most talented in the country at their positions to do what they're capable of doing. Otherwise, you're going to be in this sort of offense that they've been in, which is a lot of screen passes, dink and dunk a little bit, trying to work their way down the field. And it works to some extent. I don't know, like, for all the screen passes they've thrown to John Mechie, it's not like he's really broken too many of them. It's usually those 3 or 4 yard gains. Same thing with Brian Robinson. Sometimes there's a busted coverage and he can kind of break down the field a little bit, but it's a lot of screen passes, trying to kind of keep the blitz at bay and trying to almost be a substitute for the run. And that's even like going back to the Patriots when I covered them with Bill O'Brien as the offensive coordinator. If they couldn't run the ball, was the substitute for the run was finding your slot receiver on those short passes. And in those days, it was Wes Welker, and then it became Julian Edelman. So that's kind of going back to like Slade Bolden. If you can't run the ball for 3 or 4 yards, then maybe you can throw the ball for 4 or 5 yards to Slade Bolden, but that hasn't really been a part of this offense. I think JoJo Earl would also be another guy. And
I was going to add JoJo Earl is out.
Right. And it's a little bit baffling given how strongly Saban came out at the beginning of the season saying that this guy has Waddle-like abilities and he's going to be a special player. And there's a little bit of flashes that he showed early on in the season, but really not much after like October with JoJo Earl in terms of the offense. Like he was a punt returner and different things there, but they just don't have those number 3 and 4 receivers that you can kind of throw to underneath and use as a substitute for the running game.
And that's where he got his injury. But I like for Alabama fans, they should probably like breathe easy knowing that they have, well, definitely one of the smartest minds in football in Nick Saban, and hopefully Bill O'Brien too. And it does seem drastic to probably change your offense at this point in the season. But if they want to survive, that is what they're going to have to do. And that's just the situation. It's just the situation right now.
Let's look briefly at Arkansas's offense. Patrick, I know you had those stats pulled up a second ago. KJ Jefferson has certainly been a talented guy throughout this season. Mike, when you kind of look at what they've been able to do, there have been times where it seems like, I mean, early in the season, we thought they'd be, contending for an SEC title. That's how good this team looked. And I feel like that's relatively concerning to Bama fans, because when you don't know what you're going to get a week-by-week basis from Alabama, and you know for a fact that every opponent is going to give the Tide their absolute best. I think I saw that on Twitter the other day. Someone said every single team is going to show up and put out all the cards that they have against the Tide, because Alabama is everybody's rival. So when you have those concerns with your own team, you never know what you're going to get from this opponent. I feel like Arkansas kind of fits that bill.
Yeah, and I was just looking up, see where Treylon Burks ranks. He's third in the SEC right now, 796 receiving yards, 51 catches, 8 receiving touchdowns, which is second behind Jameson Williams. So as much as KJ Jefferson is a threat, and I think, big quarterback who can kind of move around a little bit, there definitely is some things to be concerned about there. It's Treylon Burks, who I think is a very good receiver, going to be a high draft pick, more than likely in the spring. Yeah. And, you look at what Tennessee did down the field. I think that was definitely a threat. Even Texas A&M, was able to throw down the field a little bit with Calzada, and that would be the fear if I was Alabama or Pete Golding or whomever, just kind of getting thrown at over the top and giving up some of those big plays that, I don't think every team at Alabama's played this year has really had that threat. I don't think Florida really had that threat. Miami really didn't. Ole Miss really doesn't have that over-the-top threat, but Treylon Burks is definitely a guy who could hurt you down the field.
Certainly.
But even with Alabama, like their defense, while it's been suspect at times, is not the issue, and that probably won't be the issue versus Arkansas. You would say, I mean, obviously the Texas win doesn't look that great for Arkansas anymore, as you saw on Saturday. But I think Alabama should be lucky. Hey, this is not an FCS opponent, but you lucky to be able to tune up for 2 games and, enjoy senior day, enjoy the beautiful weather that's going to happen. But I don't think the defense is going to have to worry half as much as the offense about figuring out an identity before the next 2 games loom.
Sure. The AP poll rankings came out over the weekend, guys. Alabama jumped Cincinnati when it comes to the AP. Really, no one cares about the AP anymore, and they stopped caring about it pretty much, like 7 years ago now, whenever the playoff began. So the playoff rankings come out this week. I think it's the 3rd week that we're going to see the rankings. And I know how I feel about it. I'm not sure where you guys kind of rank up, but I'm looking forward to kind of seeing this breakdown. Patrick, go ahead. You can pull mine up. Do you have that graphic?
I do. Oh, also, the show is at 6:00. It was last week. It was not at 6:00, but it is at 6:00 today.
6:00 today on ESPN. And here's what I got, guys. Georgia, Bama, we're not going to change that much. 3 and 4, quite frankly, I didn't really know what to do here. It's been such of a, well, I'm going to say mess. It's not the word I'd like to use, but it's been a mess in college football, honestly, beyond Georgia and kind of beyond Alabama. But I don't feel like you can rank Ohio State above an Oregon team that they beat. I feel like the Oregon team that beat them, I feel like head-to-head matters a lot, regardless of what the rest of your resume looks like. If you have the same record, I like Oregon in there. And then Cincinnati, man. I mean, why not? Like, why not give a G5 school, throw them a bone? So, yes, I have Cincinnati in there. I know a lot of folks are like, okay, who really wants to see a Georgia versus Cincinnati matchup? What would it actually look like? Well, who cares? I mean, I think at this point, the Bearcats are an undefeated program. How do you not put them somewhere in there? And really, quite frankly, the college football playoff committee tries to say they don't look ahead to see like what matchups are happening down the road. I don't buy that at all. I think that they know that conference title games are going to matter at the end of the day. We could just not release any playoffs and just release the last ones. That's the only one that matters, based on what happens in these conference title games. But for right now, guys, this is my top 4.
And I'll just throw them both out there because Mike and I agree. I don't think that's too far off from you.
You'll probably be right. Okay, you'll probably be right.
The Oregon thing. First of all, I'm sure everybody who watches and sports media has heard the Michigan State thing over and over. But I agree. The home and home. Beating someone on their home turf has to matter. It has to be some points. It doesn't matter what you did later or this or that, because if the college football playoff committee just wants to go off who they think is the best, then you might as well just pick the top 4 of the recruiting rankings every year. And I just don't think that really works or fits well with what we're trying to do in the college football playoff. But Oregon, you beat Ohio State, you get some style points for that. no matter what.
All right. Yeah. No, I see. I was saying all year that I think this was the year Cincinnati was going to make it. And I still think that can happen because ultimately it goes back to what I said earlier. If Alabama loses the SEC championship game, then I think Cincinnati's in. If Alabama wins the SEC championship game, then I think them and Georgia's in, and that's going to pose a problem for a school like Cincinnati.
Sure. I agree with that.
Oregon wins out, they're in. I think that is a pretty fair assumption given how high the committee seems to view them. Putting them number 3 when even I think Oregon was like number 5 or 6 in the polls when the first rankings came out a few weeks ago. The committee thinks highly of them. Ohio State has played much better football since they lost to Oregon. They've blown out a lot of the teams they played. They didn't blow out Nebraska, but you're playing like a 1920s game against them. They blew out Purdue. They beat Penn State comfortably. They blew out Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, and I think they're going to beat Michigan State and Michigan. So if they get past those two, then you're looking at a Big Ten championship game, probably against Wisconsin, and I think Ohio State wins that too. So when you have a one-loss Ohio State team that lost to a top 3 Oregon team. I don't think you can put Cincinnati that's just squeaking by some of these weeks against group of 5 teams.
I just see a lot of teams like Michigan State, you get punished for losing to a bad team. Not saying Purdue's bad, but it's like, so why doesn't Oregon get bad? You know, you see how everybody's like, oh, Ohio State's better than Oregon now. You can get punished for losing to a good team, you know, and Oregon's not even favored this week against Utah. Still probably play Utah again. So all these teams could lose. No, Cincinnati will probably win out, but like the committee was wrong putting Michigan ahead of Michigan State. That was a wrong move.
Totally agree.
Bad for the game.
Yeah, it made no sense. I mean, there are times where the committee does some things, and I really am like wondering just what the reason is for something like that. Head to head, I think has to matter more than really anything. I don't see how teams who literally beat another team, short of having like a completely different record or something like that, how they can be ranked above a team that they beat anyway, or they lost to. Guys, let's talk briefly about what things look like in terms of the college football playoff rankings regarding the outcome of the SEC title game. Rodak, you've kind of voiced your opinion on this a couple of times, but let's just say both teams went out. It's likely to happen, probably will happen. Alabama and Georgia meet in Atlanta. You know, sometimes we talk about, okay, if it's a close loss, if they play them close, you know, the Alabama could still be in. You know, I never really bought into that sort of theory because we've never really seen it play out before. What does that look like? If Bama loses, we've never seen a 2-loss team in the college football playoffs in the top 4 at the end of it all. Could that happen this year?
Highly unlikely. I think what would need to happen would be Oregon losing, whether it's like to Oregon State or Utah or in the Pac-12 championship game. It would take Cincinnati losing, I think, to kind of knock them out of the mix. It would take something weird happening in the Big Ten where you have like Wisconsin coming back to win. But even then, if you have let's say a 2-loss Wisconsin team that wins the Big Ten, they're in. I think by virtue of winning that conference, I think they're in the playoff, even though they have 2 losses. And I think in that case, a 2-loss Alabama team that lost their conference championship game would lose out in that tiebreaker. And I think even a team like Ohio State might even have a better argument over them. So it's going to be tough with 2 losses for Alabama. It's going to take, you know, you're looking at a lot of 2-loss teams at the end of the day, essentially, and they might be the best one. We'll have to see.
And another thing, like, I mean, the playoff in a sense exists because of that 2011 Alabama LSU rematch, you know? So if Alabama was looking really dominant, looked like that team, the team from last year, I think they'd have a shot with a loss. But I think if you lose even a close game, this line came out on Monday. That's why I threw that Georgia's favored by 3, which I think is actually very surprising for the Tide to get that line.
Right.
I think if you lose at all, you're out for Alabama because you have not shown that you are this dominant team that just fell in Texas, you know?
Right. But the problem, I think, too, for Alabama in that case would just be the matchup. And if Georgia wins out, then they're the number 1 seed. And if Alabama even makes it as a 2-loss team, you'd have to put them as the 4 seed. which means you're just playing each other again in the first round, and people just kind of roll their eyes and say,
that'd be fun.
Game?
Well, y'all were saying it was about money, but there's no money that they would allow that to happen. They do not want that to happen.
If it's the other way around, and if Alabama wins the SEC championship game, then I think they would put Georgia either 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So you're not having that game be the rematch.
I agree with that. Yeah.
In the semifinal.
Yeah.
You're having Alabama play a Cincinnati or whomever is the 4 seed.
Yeah.
Georgia plays somebody else, and if they meet again, then they meet again. That's just fate. Sure. But I don't think they're going to set up a conference rematch of a conference championship game.
Yeah.
Because we just saw that game.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. It makes sense. I mean, we'll see. I mean, the committee, they put out what they base their opinions on, and I feel like that changes every single week. I don't ever feel like it's the same. We'll see what it looks like tonight. You said 6 o'clock, Patrick, for the
6 o'clock Central. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 6 o'clock tonight is the College Football Playoff Ranking Show, the third week that they will release those. So, guys, at the end of the day, Alabama has to take care of business this week against Arkansas, top 20 or something ranked
25,
team.
25.
Top 25 ranked team.
Yeah.
Alabama probably will continue to be the number 2. Expect that to kind of stay the same. So we'll see. Kickoff set for 2:30 at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Mike Rodak, thanks so much for joining us today. Patrick Greenfield, as always, I'm Simone Eli. Guys, thanks for tuning in to Bama News, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.